On my 68th birthday, I waited all evening with a homemade apple pie and 3 lit candles. No one came. I thought maybe they forgot. Until I saw the Facebook post, my son, his wife, and their kids, smiling at a fancy steakhouse. The caption read, "Celebrating the queen of our home, Lena." That's when I realized I wasn't part of their family anymore. I was just a guest, or worse, a burden. But they forgot one thing. I still owned the house, and I had no intention of leaving quietly. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 67 years old, and until a few months ago, I lived alone in a cozy 2-bedroom cottage tucked between the pines in Maine. My late husband, Thomas, built that house with his bare hands, and for the last 20 years since he passed, it was my sanctuary. I cooked in that kitchen until the wood floors grew warm under my step. I kept the garden blooming even when my knees ached. I knew every creak in those floorboards and every bird that nested on my windowsill. I was a nurse for nearly 4 decades, chief of staff by the time I retired. I was proud of my work, proud of my independence. But then, one winter morning, I slipped on a patch of black ice while taking the trash out. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't break a hip or need surgery, but it rattled me. My balance hadn't failed me before, and suddenly the stairs in my own home felt like threats. The doctor called it a warning shot. My son, Daniel, called it a sign. Daniel was always practical, always the planner. "You shouldn't be alone anymore, Mom," he said, voice soft but firm over the phone. "It's not safe. Lena and I have plenty of space now that the basement's done. Come live with us, at least until we figure out something permanent." At first I hesitated. I didn't want to be a burden. I loved my life, my neighbors, my garden, my church book club. But Daniel was persuasive. So was Lena, his wife. She sent me pictures of the guest room. Bright, minimal, with a white armchair by the window. "You'll love it," she said. "We'll finally get to spend more time together, and the kids miss you." I told myself I'd try. I told myself I'd still have my own space. I told myself this was a new chapter, not the end of one. Selling the cottage was hard. I cried the night the for sale sign went up, but the market was strong, and within 3 weeks, it was gone. I took a portion of the money and gave it to Daniel and Lena to help them renovate their home, mostly as a thank you, I thought. "Let's put in a proper entrance downstairs," Daniel said, "and maybe some new flooring so you feel more settled." The move-in day was warm for spring. The kids, Emma and Jack, ran out to greet me, arms flying. "Grandma!" they squealed. My heart melted. Lena hugged me like we were old friends. Daniel carried in my boxes and kept saying, "We're so happy you're here." That first week was sweet. Dinners together. Board games. I helped Lena prep meals, folded laundry, read bedtime stories. I felt like part of something again. There was laughter at the table. The house smelled like cinnamon and tomato sauce. I told my old neighbor on the phone, "It's not the same, but I'm lucky." I was given the room in the lower level, technically not the basement, they said. It's a walkout suite. It didn't have a closet, but Daniel installed a clothes rack. The one small window sat high up on the wall, more like a vent than a view. "We'll fix it up more once the upstairs guest room is ready," Lena promised. "This is just temporary." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She smiled when she said it. And Daniel had that tired but sincere look he wore when juggling kids, work, and marriage. I didn't want to add pressure. Besides, the kids loved having me there. Every morning, Jack would tiptoe into my room asking for pancakes. Emma would bring me her spelling tests. They made me feel wanted. I unpacked slowly. I didn't hang pictures on the walls, just leaned them against the nightstand. I didn't set out the ceramic birds Thomas had collected, afraid of breaking them. Something in me said, "Don't get too comfortable yet." But I brushed it off. I baked banana bread. I took the kids to the park. I trimmed the hydrangeas by the mailbox. "See," I told myself, "this could work." And for a little while, it did. The house was always buzzing with sound. Emma's laughter echoing from the living room, Jack's little feet thumping down the hallway, the clink of dinner plates, the soft hum of the dishwasher, Lena's voice floating through the kitchen as she sang to herself. It felt alive, more alive than the quiet stillness I had grown used to in my old cottage. At first, I thought that was a good thing. Lena was gracious in the beginning. She'd hand me a fresh towel folded just right, or bring down a cup of tea in the evenings, saying, "Just chamomile. Thought you might want to unwind." She invited me to sit at the kitchen island while she cooked, asking about my favorite meals. She even made my mother's pot roast recipe one night, perfectly tender, and said, "I want to learn the dishes Daniel grew up with." Daniel, too, seemed genuinely happy I was there. "You've worked so hard your whole life, Mom," he said one evening after dinner. "Let us take care of you now." He'd squeeze my shoulder, smile that crooked smile he had since he was 6. He looked tired but content, juggling work calls and helping the kids with homework, still making time to check in with me. It made my heart full. There were family photos everywhere, on the stairwell, on the mantel, along the hallway. Lena had a thing for printing out every occasion: beach trips, Christmas mornings, Emma's ballet recitals, Jack's science fair. I noticed there weren't any pictures of me, but I figured I hadn't lived there long enough yet. "We'll take a new family portrait soon," Daniel had promised. One with everyone. Dinner time was always together. We lit candles sometimes. Emma said grace, Jack tried to sneak peas to the dog, and Lena would pass the bread while Daniel talked about his work. They'd ask me about my day or what I thought of a new recipe. It felt cozy, whole. The kind of table I used to dream about when Thomas and I were newlyweds, wondering what our grown family would look like. But then there was my room. It was technically on the first floor, off to the side near the laundry. They called it temporary, a makeshift space, while they redid the upstairs guest room. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? Lena showed me color swatches for the future paint. Daniel mentioned moving a bookshelf to make more space. But weeks passed, then months, and the upstairs remained untouched. My room was small. No closet, no real window, just a narrow glass pane near the ceiling that let in a sliver of morning light. The bed was fine, though creaky. There was a folding chair, a borrowed lamp, and a wire rack to hang my clothes. It reminded me of a college dorm, not in a charming way. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself to be patient. "They're doing their best," I whispered every time I saw Daniel rub his temples after work or Lena wrestle Jack into pajamas. One evening, Lena walked by as I was folding towels and said, "You're such a help, Margaret. I don't know how we managed before." I smiled, genuinely warmed. Helping felt good, needed. I liked cooking the stew before they got home, ironing Emma's recital outfit, organizing Jack's art supplies. It gave me purpose. But there were small, subtle moments I couldn't quite explain. One night, I offered to put the leftovers in Tupperware, and Lena hesitated before saying, "Oh, we usually do things a certain way here." Another time, I went to the pantry for flour and found the door locked. "Oh, sorry," she laughed, flustered. "We just started locking it so Jack doesn't make a mess." Daniel started spending more evenings upstairs after work, saying he needed quiet for Zoom calls. I stayed downstairs with the kids, reading or tidying up. Slowly, I felt a shift, like I was expected to blend into the background. Helpful, but quiet. Present, but not central. I hadn't been upstairs in over a month. Lena would always say, "It's a mess up there, trust me." So I stayed in my room. I watched the daylight come and go from the little slit of glass above my bed. I waited for the day the upstairs room would be ready. I imagined curtains I'd pick, the quilt I'd bring from storage. I kept believing, because that's what mothers do. We believe in the promises our children make, even when the house begins to feel less like home and more like a favor. 3 months passed, and the upstairs guest room remained nothing more than a promise. Every now and then, Lena would mention it in passing. "We've just been so swamped," or Contractors are impossible lately, but nothing ever moved. No paint cans, no hammering, no signs of renovation. I stopped asking. Each time I did, it felt like I was pressuring them, and that wasn't who I wanted to be. The room downstairs became my entire world. I made do. I folded my clothes on the bed since there was no dresser. I learned to store my shoes in a cardboard box. I found ways to keep myself occupied, ironing linens, organizing drawers, sweeping the entryway. There was always something to clean, and I was grateful to feel useful. But small things began to shift. Lena stopped lingering in the kitchen with me. She used to make tea for both of us after dinner. Now she took her mug upstairs without a word. The warmth in her voice faded. Her compliments, once genuine, became rare, replaced with polite, clipped phrases. "Thanks, Margaret," she'd say, handing me a basket of unfolded laundry. "Could you handle this while I take a call?" Daniel, too, became scarce. He claimed work was overwhelming. New clients, late hours, back-to-back meetings. I barely saw him outside of dinner, and even then, he seemed distracted. His phone buzzed constantly. Sometimes he'd get up mid-meal and not return until long after the dishes were cleared. The kids changed, too. Jack, who used to burst into my room every morning, stopped coming in altogether. Emma, who once asked me to braid her hair for school, now avoided eye contact and mumbled hello. I assumed they were just getting older, busy with school, friends, screens, but something about their distance felt directed, or worse, instructed. One evening, I heard Emma ask her mom, "Can Grandma come to the recital?" And Lena replied, "Let's keep it just us this time, sweetie." I stood in the hallway out of sight, pretending not to hear, pretending it didn't sting. Then came the lists. Printed pages taped to the fridge. Monday, pick up dry cleaning. Tuesday, fold laundry. Wednesday, prep dinner by 5 p.m. There was a second list for the pantry. No food storage in downstairs room. Ask before using oven. No guests without notice. At first, I told myself it was just Lena being organized, but the tone was unmistakable. Directive, not collaborative, like rules you'd give to a tenant, or worse, a maid. I began to notice what wasn't said. Conversations that hushed when I entered the room. Texts Daniel quickly minimized. Lena whispering behind a closed pantry door. Once I walked into the kitchen and they stopped talking altogether, just stared at me, smiling too quickly, too wide. One Saturday, I decided to bake banana bread for the kids. I used to make it every week in my old home. The smell of cinnamon and brown sugar always brought comfort. But as I opened the flour jar, Lena appeared at the doorway. "Oh," she said, her voice tight, "next time, can you check with me first before using those ingredients? I have a meal plan I'm following." I froze, the measuring cup still in my hand. "Of course," I said softly. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," she interrupted. "Just be mindful. Be mindful." That phrase began to haunt me. It showed up in her emails, sticky notes, text messages. Be mindful of kitchen use. Be mindful of noise after 9 p.m. Be mindful of storage space. It was code, a subtle reminder that I didn't belong. One evening, while tidying up the living room, I found a folded paper behind the couch, a drawing by Jack. It showed a house with 4 stick figures, a man, a woman, a girl, a boy, the family, no grandmother. I don't know why that hit me harder than anything else. Maybe because it was innocent, honest. Children don't lie with crayons. That night, lying in my small, windowless room, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself, when did this stop feeling like home? I remembered what Daniel said that first week. "This is your house too, Mom." But the room they gave me had no key. The fridge had rules. My schedule was filled with chores, and their lives went on upstairs. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I was convenient. And deep down, something told me it was only the beginning. It was my birthday, 68. I woke up early, not because anyone had planned anything, but because I wanted the day to feel special, even if it was just for me. The sun barely touched the edge of the high window in my room, casting a soft rectangle of light onto the floor. I sat up slowly, feeling every year in my bones, but also something else: hope. I baked an apple pie. It was my signature, the same recipe Thomas loved, the one I'd made for Daniel's birthdays and Thanksgiving dinners for decades. I rolled the dough by hand, added extra cinnamon, and dotted the crust with sugar. The smell wrapped around the house by noon. Then I set the table. Nothing elaborate, just my best. The floral plates, folded napkins, the tall candlesticks Lena kept in the cupboard. I found a bottle of white wine and chilled it. I left my door open all day, waiting to hear footsteps, voices, any sign of planning. I didn't need balloons or presents. I just wanted to be remembered. At 4 p.m., I checked my phone. No messages. By 5, I started boiling water for pasta. I made a simple red sauce from scratch. I lit the candles. I sliced the pie. At 6 o'clock sharp, I stood at the windowless wall, watching the clock tick forward. Still no one. The house was silent, eerily so. No car in the driveway, no keys jangling in the lock, not even a text saying they'd be late. By 6:30, the noodles had gone sticky. At 7, the candles burned low. I turned off the stove. I put the pie back in the fridge. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat down at the table, meant for 5, and stared across at the empty chairs. The silence pressed against my chest. I didn't cry. I told myself maybe they'd forgotten. Maybe there was a surprise coming. Maybe I was being silly. But I knew. I had known since that morning when no one had even said, "Happy birthday." Still, denial is a comfortable coat. Around 8 p.m., I opened Facebook, and there it was, the photo. Daniel, Lena, Emma, and Jack, dressed up, beaming at a candlelit table in a trendy restaurant. Emma wore a new dress. Jack held up a mocktail with a cherry on top. Daniel had his arm around Lena, who smiled like she'd just been crowned queen. The caption read, "Dinner with the most important woman in our lives, Lena." I stared at the screen, read it again. The most important woman, Lena, not happy birthday, Mom, not even a generic family dinner, just a celebration for her on my birthday. I scrolled through the comments. Friends from Lena's yoga group posted hearts and clapping emojis. "You deserve it, girl," one wrote. "So lucky to have such a loving family," said another. Daniel liked every single one. I sat there, my phone heavy in my hand, the light from the screen casting a pale glow in the dark room. The candles on my table had burned out. The food was cold. The wine glass was empty. And suddenly, so was I. I didn't feel angry, not at first. I felt invisible, like I'd been erased. Like all the years of late-night fevers, packed lunches, college bills, bedtime stories, emergency calls, all of it had dissolved into nothing. I walked back to my room. The basement was colder than usual. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat on the edge of the bed, trying not to cry. But then I noticed something. A folded paper on the floor just inside my door, tucked neatly under the frame, like it had been slipped in quietly while I was upstairs. I picked it up. It was a printed sheet, neatly formatted, titled "Shared Living Expectations." My heart sank. Rules, guidelines, household agreements, whatever they wanted to call it, it was a list, a contract, a set of restrictions laid out as if I were a guest renting a room. No kitchen use after 8 p.m. Noise levels to remain low in shared spaces. Please coordinate childcare responsibilities in advance. Refrain from using upstairs facilities unless invited. Limit personal guests to once per month with notice. At the bottom, there was a space for a signature. Mine. No discussion, no conversation, just a form. I stared at it for a long time. My name wasn't even on the top. It said, "Resident Westsintrauersens." Yeah, resident. Not mother, not grandma, not Margaret. Resident. Something in me broke. But something else started to wake up. I woke the next morning with a heaviness pressing down on my chest, like the weight of 1,000 silent voices telling me I was no longer welcome. The air in the house felt colder, sharper. The cheerful light I had held onto yesterday was flickering, and deep down I knew something had changed, something I couldn't fix with a smile or a warm meal. On the kitchen counter, where I'd left my tea mug the night before, was a single sheet of paper. At first I thought it might be a note from Lena, a kind word, an apology, or maybe a plan to talk, but as I unfolded it, the words hit me like a blow. "Mom, we need to be clear about boundaries," it began in Lena's neat, looping handwriting. "This is a shared living agreement to help us all live together peacefully." I sat down, clutching the paper as if it might slip through my fingers. The list that followed felt more like a cage than an agreement. Bathroom use limited to 6 a.m., 9 a.m., and 5 p.m., 8 p.m. No kitchen use after 8 p.m. Childcare duties require prior approval. No personal guests without advance notice. Quiet hours strictly enforced after 9 p.m. I read and reread, trying to find any sign of warmth or understanding. There was none. Only rules. Only restrictions. I thought back to the days when I cared for Daniel as a boy, the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home from college, the times I'd rushed to the hospital to hold his hand during surgeries, and now I was being told when I could use the bathroom, when I could cook, when I could even hold my own grandchildren. It felt like a betrayal too deep for words. I looked around the kitchen, the place where we had shared countless meals, stories, and laughter, the place that had once felt like home. Now it was a territory marked by invisible lines and silent judgments. I tried to steady my breathing, but my throat tightened. I felt a raw ache spread through me, a mix of sadness, anger, and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had I become so invisible in my own family? I wanted to call Daniel, to ask him why, but the phone felt heavy in my hand. Instead, I sank into the kitchen chair, head resting on the table, tears threatening to fall. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Later that morning, Lena appeared. Her smile was polite but distant. "Good morning, Margaret," she said softly. "Did you see the agreement? It's just to keep things running smoothly." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I read it," she continued. "I know it's a lot, but we just want to avoid misunderstandings. Living together isn't always easy." I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice caught. Instead, I nodded again and said, "Thank you for letting me know." Days turned into weeks, and the boundaries became walls. I found myself timing my showers, avoiding the kitchen during meal prep, and stepping back when the children played. The house that once buzzed with life felt like a maze where I was always the outsider. The kids barely came into my room anymore. Emma whispered to Lena when she thought I wasn't listening, "Grandma's weird." Jack stopped asking for bedtime stories, his eyes darting away whenever I looked at him. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Lena handed me a list of chores. "We thought it'd help you keep track," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "We appreciate everything you do." I took the list, feeling like I was being handed a job description rather than a role in the family. The emotional toll was immense. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had gone wrong. Was it something I said? Something I didn't do? The memories of a loving family seemed to dissolve into the cold reality of my new life. My heart ached not just from loneliness, but from the sting of rejection by the people I loved most. Yet, amid the pain, a small flame flickered inside me, a resolve not to disappear quietly, not to be a forgotten shadow in my own home. I began keeping a journal, writing down every slight, every cold word, every unspoken moment. I collected evidence, not out of spite, but to remind myself that I deserved respect. The more I documented, the clearer my path became. I was not just a guest, I was a mother, and I would fight to reclaim my place. After weeks of quiet observation and silent endurance, I decided it was time to look deeper. I needed to understand exactly where I stood in this home I had come to live in, or rather where I had been placed. The boundaries, the rules, the cold treatment, they all pointed to one thing. I wasn't family anymore. But was I truly just a guest? I dug out the old box of documents I had brought with me from my Maine cottage. Among my medical papers, photo albums, and letters, there was a folder labeled Important. Inside, I found deeds, insurance policies, and tax documents, remnants of a life built carefully over decades. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder spread out before me. I wanted to understand the home I was living in, the house that once belonged to my family, now feeling so foreign. I opened the deed. My eyes scanned the page, then widened in disbelief. The property's legal owner was me, Margaret Holloway, signed and notarized. I sat back, stunned. How could this be? I remembered Daniel telling me he and Lena had bought the house after their financial struggles, something about credit issues and loan rejections. What I hadn't realized was that I had quietly been the one footing the bill. Going back through the documents, I found the mortgage agreement. My signature was on every page. The down payment came from the sale of my cottage. The monthly payments, they had been withdrawn from my savings account for years. I had been the bank's true customer all along. I felt my throat tighten. For so long, I'd thought I was the guest, the visitor, the burden. But the truth was harsher. I was the one supporting this household financially, quietly carrying the weight of their dreams and debts. I picked up an old letter from the bank, dated nearly a decade ago, addressed to me. Re-mortgage account for 56 Elm Street. I traced my fingers over the faded ink. This was my house, my money, my sacrifice. But where was the respect? The gratitude? The more I looked, the more confused I became. How could my son and daughter-in-law treat me as an outsider when I had been their silent benefactor all along? A bitter mix of anger and sorrow welled inside me. The people who should have protected me, cherished me, had allowed me to slip into the shadows of their lives. I thought of the small room I'd been given. No closet, no window. I thought of the strict rules, the whispered conversations, the avoidance. I had been paying for a home where I was not truly at home. I closed the folder slowly and leaned back in my chair. I felt a strange clarity wash over me. I wasn't just staying with my family. I was being used, a resident in my own house. I needed answers, I needed proof, and I needed to find a way to reclaim what was mine, not just the property, but my dignity. That night, I started making notes. Dates, conversations, instances of exclusion. I scribbled down memories that now seemed like signs I had missed. Text messages deleted, phone calls cut short, casual comments that stung. I realized that this discovery was the first step, not just in understanding the situation, but in fighting back. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel hope. Hope that I wasn't powerless. Hope that this house could become a home again. After the shock of discovering I was the legal owner of the house, I knew I had to dig deeper. It wasn't just about the walls and roof over my head anymore. It was about understanding how far the betrayal ran and how much of my life had been quietly taken without my knowledge. I started by going through my financial documents, all the bills, bank statements, insurance papers I'd managed to keep organized. I found an old folder labeled Insurance, tucked behind a stack of unpaid medical bills. My heart pounded as I opened it. Among the papers was a life insurance policy, one I had signed years ago, back when Thomas was still alive. The beneficiary listed was me. That was supposed to be a safety net, a promise that if something happened to him, I'd be protected. But when I called the insurance company to ask about the policy, I was stunned to hear that the beneficiary had been changed. The name was now Lena's. My breath caught. I asked how this had happened without my knowledge. The representative explained that a form had been submitted last year, signed with my name. But when I asked for a copy of the signature, I was told it was difficult to provide due to privacy policies. I hung up feeling dizzy. Had Lena forged my signature? Or had Daniel helped her? I didn't know. but I felt violated, as if they had robbed me of the last shred of security I had left. Determined to uncover more, I requested copies of my recent bank statements. When the envelopes arrived, I sat at the kitchen table and sorted through them, page by page. What I found was unsettling. Several payments I didn't recognize. Large sums withdrawn or transferred to accounts I didn't know existed. One payment in particular caught my eye, a monthly withdrawal listed as loan guarantee. I called my bank branch and spoke to the manager. "Mrs. Holloway, your son has used your retirement savings as collateral to secure a business loan," she said carefully. "He assured us you were aware and had consented." I shook my head, disbelief flooding me. "I never agreed to anything like that." The manager sympathized but said the paperwork was signed with my name. I asked to see the documents. When they arrived, I scanned the pages, searching for my signature. It looked like mine, but I couldn't be sure. The handwriting was shaky, almost mechanical. I felt tears prick my eyes. How could Daniel do this? Use my life savings, the money I had planned to live on peacefully in my later years, like it was his own? But the story didn't end there. I noticed other charges on my bank statements. Bills for home repairs I never requested, subscriptions I didn't recognize, even a payment to a gym membership for someone else. It was as if my finances had become a black hole, swallowing money in ways I couldn't explain. That night, I confided in a close friend over the phone. "Margaret," she said, voice low, "this sounds like financial abuse. You need help." She recommended a lawyer who specialized in elder rights and family law. The next day, I made an appointment. Sitting across from the lawyer, I laid out all the documents: the house deed, insurance policy changes, bank statements, loan paperwork. She listened carefully, nodding. "This is a clear case of exploitation," she said firmly. "Your son and daughter-in-law have overstepped their bounds and potentially committed fraud." We discussed options: freezing accounts, contesting the insurance beneficiary change, reclaiming control over finances. I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that I wasn't imagining things, fear of what the fight would mean. But I knew one thing: I couldn't let this continue. I started gathering more evidence: emails, texts, anything that could show I hadn't consented to these changes. I set up a small notebook by my bedside, jotting down dates, times, and incidents. It became my shield and my weapon. Each discovery was a wound, but also a spark of determination. I would not be invisible. I would not be silenced. This house, my home, was worth fighting for. The more I uncovered, the more I realized I couldn't face this alone. I needed someone I could trust, someone who knew my history, who wouldn't brush me off or treat me like a helpless old woman. So I called James Ellison, my late husband's attorney. He was retired now, living in Vermont. But when I explained what was happening, he didn't hesitate. "I'll drive down," he said. "Give me 2 days." When James arrived, his silver hair was longer, his gait slower, but his eyes were still sharp. We sat in a small diner near the edge of town, away from prying ears. I laid everything out for him: the stolen money, the insurance forgery, the misuse of my retirement. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed, occasionally jotting notes in his old leather notebook. When I finished, he sighed and pulled out a thin manila envelope from his briefcase. "Margaret," he said gently, "Thomas left something with me before he passed. He made me promise to only give it to you if you ever found yourself in a situation where your place in the family was being threatened." My breath caught. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Thomas's strong, steady script. "My dearest Maggie," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I was right to worry. I've watched how Lena speaks to you when she thinks no one's looking. I've seen the way Daniel flinches when confronted. I know you believe the best in people, and that's part of why I love you. But I need you to protect yourself. I've set up a life insurance policy, one you didn't know about. You are the policy holder and sole beneficiary. It pays out only if you're forced from your home under undue influence. I wanted to make sure you were never powerless. even if I couldn't be there. I sat there, hands trembling, tears welling in my eyes. Thomas had known. He had seen it coming, and instead of forcing me to face it then, he prepared quietly, lovingly, strategically. There was more. James handed me a small USB drive. This, he said, was recorded 6 weeks before Thomas passed. He asked me to keep it in case Lena ever tried to isolate you. Back home, I waited until the house was empty before plugging the drive into my laptop. Thomas's voice filled the room, deep, familiar, comforting. If Lena's running the show and Danny's going along with it, you need to stop being polite. This is your home, Maggie. You paid for it. You earned it. And if they ever make you feel like you're a guest, press play on this and remember who you are. He paused, then added, voice cracking slightly, you gave everything for this family. Don't let them take away your last years, not without a fight. I wept, but it wasn't sadness. It was release, validation, power. Thomas had trusted me to be strong, and I would be. The next day, I called my lawyer and began the process of transferring the property title fully back into my name, removing any shared designation Daniel had requested during escrow. We filed the necessary forms with the county clerk's office. Legally, there would be no question. The house belonged to me. Then I rewrote my will. I removed Daniel and Lena entirely as beneficiaries and instead designated a local women's foundation that supports elderly victims of domestic abuse and financial exploitation. If anything happened to me, they would ensure my story and my assets served a greater purpose. But I wasn't done yet. I bought a set of discrete home security cameras online and installed them myself. One above the stairwell, one in the kitchen, one just inside the laundry room near my bedroom, each activated by motion, each recording audio. No one questioned it. They never noticed. They had already stopped looking at me. I recorded everything. Lena's passive-aggressive orders, Daniel's dismissive grunts, Emma mimicking her mother's tone when talking about grandma's clutter. I never spoke back. I never argued. I just gathered truth. Because truth, when wielded with precision, can cut deeper than any insult. And I was sharpening it for the day they would see just how wrong they were. Once I had the truth, the rest became strategy. I moved quietly, deliberately, like a woman preparing for war, not with weapons or violence, but with documents, dates, and silent observation. The first step was the deed. With James's help, I finalized the paperwork to reclaim sole ownership of the house. Legally, I had always been the primary owner, but I hadn't realized how much Daniel had quietly inserted himself into the title years ago, just enough to create confusion if I ever challenged his authority. We submitted the change request at the county office, along with a formal affidavit of funding and maintenance, showing that all major payments and repairs had come from my accounts. It was an emotional moment. Standing at the clerk's counter, watching them stamp the revised deed, my name and only my name, felt like inhaling after months underwater. This was my home again. No more blurred lines, no more silent concessions, no more guilt. Step 2, my will. The old one had been written years ago when Thomas was still alive, and we'd assumed Daniel would continue to be the dependable, kind-hearted son he'd once been. But people change, or perhaps we had just never seen him clearly. With my new attorney, I wrote a will that reflected the world as it was now, not as I wished it to be. Daniel and Lena were removed as heirs. Instead, I appointed a nonprofit organization that provided grants and housing for elderly women facing displacement. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted my life, my labor, and my story to protect others like me. The lawyer asked if I was certain. I looked her in the eye and said, "More than I've ever been." Finally, I turned to surveillance. I had already installed 3 hidden cameras around the house. They blended into the background, disguised as air fresheners, light sensors, even a fake bookend. I tested them at night, checked the footage on a private cloud account, made sure audio picked up even the whispers behind closed doors. What I captured in just 1 week made my stomach turn. Lena in the kitchen, rolling her eyes as she mimicked my voice. "Oh, should we wait for Margaret to eat first?" she mocked, laughing to herself. Daniel standing in the hallway, muttering to her, "She's getting nosy. We need to move faster before she starts asking more questions." And worst of all, Jack and Emma. I heard my grandchildren repeating phrases like, "Grandma's weird," and "she's always in the way," or words they didn't come up with on their own. They were learning it from their parents. It hurt. Deeply. But it also solidified my resolve. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being sensitive or paranoid. I was being erased. Slowly, methodically, with smiling faces and cheerful tones, masking a coordinated effort to isolate and control me. But they didn't know I was watching. And I had no intention of revealing my hand too soon. I began keeping a daily journal, logging interactions, tracking inconsistencies, and cross-referencing dates with the footage I collected. I created a private file on my computer, labeled Contingency Plan, and backed everything up twice, once on an external drive, once in the cloud. I also started behaving differently, just subtly. I asked fewer questions. I stopped offering help. I smiled at Lena's comments but didn't react. I nodded when Daniel spoke but made no promises. I wanted them to think I was drifting further into passivity, that I was surrendering. Meanwhile, I was sharpening the knife of truth behind the curtain. There were nights when I still lay awake, staring at the blank ceiling, wondering how we'd gotten here. But now, those moments weren't filled with confusion or heartbreak. They were filled with calculation. I was preparing for something bigger than an argument. I was preparing to take my power back, not through screaming or begging, but through undeniable evidence, strategic timing, and the quiet, unwavering voice of a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. I sent the email on a Wednesday afternoon, short, polite, warm, subject, family dinner, Saturday, 6 p.m., hi Daniel, Lena. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I know living together hasn't always been easy, and I appreciate the space you've given me. I'd love to cook dinner for everyone this Saturday to show my gratitude. Just us. No fuss. Hope you can come. Love, Mom. I stared at the words before hitting send. They sounded soft, unthreatening. Exactly what I needed them to be. Within the hour, Lena replied, "That's so sweet, Margaret. Count us in." Daniel wrote a separate message. "Looking forward to it. I know we haven't said it enough, but we appreciate you, too." I smiled. Not because I believed them, because the stage was set. I spent the next 2 days preparing, not just the meal, but the atmosphere. I pulled out the good china from the back cabinet, polished silverware that hadn't seen daylight in years. I even ironed the tablecloth with the autumn leaf embroidery Lena had once complimented. I also made sure every camera was fully charged, positioned at the right angles, and connected to the remote server. My laptop, hidden in my bedroom, would record everything. I cooked their favorites: rosemary roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, sautéed green beans. I even baked a lemon tart, Lena's favorite, though she would never admit it in front of me anymore. At 5:58 p.m., I lit 2 candles and dimmed the overhead lights. The dining room looked cozy, intimate, safe. At exactly 6 o'clock, I heard the garage door open. Footsteps, laughter, the sound of heels clicking across tile. "Smells amazing," Lena said as she entered, pulling off her coat. She looked relaxed, effortlessly elegant in her tan sweater and gold hoop earrings. "Did you make that tart from scratch?" "I did," I said with a smile. "Thought you'd enjoy it." Daniel stepped in behind her, rolling up his sleeves. "Wow, Mom, this looks fancy." "Just wanted to make it special," I said. "We haven't sat down like this in a while." Emma and Jack were upstairs, invited but not required for dinner. I wanted this conversation to happen without innocent eyes. We sat. I poured the wine. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation was light. Vacations, work updates. Lena talked about a potential promotion. Daniel mentioned refinancing a loan. I nodded, asked polite questions, kept my tone airy. They were at ease, almost smug. Lena complimented the food twice. Daniel even offered to help clear the dishes afterward. It was the version of them I hadn't seen in months. The version they presented to the world. They didn't know I had seen the other version too. The cruel one. I sipped my wine and studied their faces, the way Lena leaned back in her chair, fully comfortable, as if she owned the space. The way Daniel held his fork with casual authority, unaware that the walls around him had shifted. I glanced at the clock, 6:42 p.m. Perfect. I pushed my chair back gently and stood. I have something to share, I said. Lena looked up, surprised. Oh? Daniel smiled. Is it dessert time already? I shook my head. Not quite. I walked toward the living room and picked up a small remote from the sideboard drawer. With one click, the TV screen on the far wall came to life. The audio feed hummed for a second, then cleared. Lena furrowed her brow. What's going on? I turned to them, calm and steady. Tonight is a thank you dinner, I said. But not for what you think. Then I pressed play. The screen flickered for a moment, then settled into black. And then, his voice. Thomas. Rich, steady, unmistakable. Maggie, if you're hearing this, it means what I feared has happened. If they're trying to push you out of the house you paid for, the house we worked so hard to make possible, then listen to me closely. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not powerless. I didn't look at Daniel or Lena. I kept my eyes on the screen, hands resting lightly on the back of my chair. They may smile to your face. They may say it's for your own good. But I know you. You'd give them everything and never ask for anything back. Don't let them take advantage of that kindness. A soft gasp escaped Lena's lips. Daniel shifted in his seat. What is this? I ignored him. Thomas's voice continued. This is your house. If they ever make you feel small in it, play this. If they try to make you feel like a guest, remember, you paid the price of admission long ago. I clicked to the next clip. The screen showed a grainy view from the kitchen camera, angled just above the pantry shelf. Lena stood by the counter, her arms crossed, voice sharp. She's getting old. She can't even keep track of which day is trash day, she said, laughing softly. Just get her to sign the transfer papers. Once her name's off the deed, we'll move her to Shady Pines or whatever, somewhere out of the way. The video cut to another clip. Daniel, seated in the living room, rubbing his temples. I know, he muttered. But we can't afford to keep supporting her forever. I didn't think she'd last this long in the basement. We need her out before the refinance. I pressed pause. The silence in the dining room was deafening. Lena stared at the screen, pale, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel's jaw was clenched, his knuckles white against the table. I finally turned to face them. I've been called a lot of things in this house, I said quietly. A burden, an inconvenience, a guest, but never a mother, never a human being with worth. Daniel stood abruptly. Mom, this is out of context. You're twisting things. I raised an eyebrow. Am I? Lena's voice rose. You were recording us? You've been spying? I met her gaze evenly. I've been surviving. She slammed her napkin down. This is insane. No, I said, stepping forward, placing both palms gently on the table. What's insane is thinking you could treat someone like a disposable appliance and never face consequences. Daniel rubbed his face. We didn't mean it like that. But you did mean it, I said. Every word. You planned to erase me. Legally, emotionally, you already started. I turned and retrieved a folder from the sideboard. I placed it on the table between us. This, I said, tapping the folder, is a certified deed. The house belongs solely to me again. Your names are no longer attached. Lena blinked rapidly. You can't just— I can, I cut her off, and I did. Daniel looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he'd forgotten that I had raised him to be strong and I had strength of my own. I straightened my spine. The cameras, the audio, the documents. I've sent them to my attorney. Copies are secure in 3 locations. If you attempt to retaliate, manipulate, or threaten me in any way, legal action will follow. No one spoke. I walked to the head of the table and picked up the pie server. Would you like dessert? I asked calmly. It's lemon tart. I stood still for a long moment, watching the weight of silence settle across the room like a thick fog. Lena stared at the pie server in my hand, as if the whole world had tilted and she couldn't find her footing. Daniel looked as though he was trying to wake up from a bad dream, one where his control, his entitlement, had been stripped bare. Then I spoke. I am the legal owner of this home, I said, voice clear, calm, unshaken. And as of yesterday, it no longer belongs to this family. Daniel blinked. What are you talking about? I've donated the house, I said, to a nonprofit that provides emergency housing for elderly women who've been manipulated, mistreated, and discarded by their families. Women like me. Lena's eyes went wide. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, I replied. They're arriving tomorrow at noon to begin preparations for the transfer. The organization will turn this place into a transitional shelter. You'll need to be out by the end of the month. The color drained from Lena's face. You can't do that. The kids live here. And no, I said softly. They live somewhere that was paid for by someone they no longer acknowledge. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. You're just doing this out of spite, revenge. That's not who you are. I looked at him for a long beat. Maybe you should ask yourself why I had to become someone else to protect myself. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I gave everything, I continued. My home, my money, my time, my love. And you turned me into a housekeeper with rules taped to the fridge. You left me alone on my birthday. You used my retirement like a loan fund, and you stood by while your wife treated me like a trespasser. Lena's voice cracked. We didn't mean it to go this far. But you let it, I said, and that's enough. Tears began streaming down her face. She stood and pointed at the screen. This isn't fair. You made us look like monsters. I tilted my head slightly. You did that all by yourselves. I just hit play. Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising. You think this is justice? Throwing your own family out into the street? I stared at him, not with anger, but with clarity. No, I said. This is me reclaiming the dignity you tried to erase. I am not your burden. I am not your backup plan. And this— I gestured around the dining room, the remnants of our fractured meal— was never your house to begin with. He opened his mouth again, but I raised a hand. There's nothing else to say, Daniel. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. I turned slowly and walked toward the hallway. My hands didn't tremble. My breath didn't hitch. I moved with the stillness of someone who had waited too long to stand up and had finally remembered how. Behind me, I heard Lena begin to sob, loud and uncontrolled. Daniel cursed under his breath, pacing the kitchen, but I didn't look back. I walked to my room, not their basement cell, and closed the door gently. No slamming, no shouting, no theatrics, just peace. For the first time in months. They had tried to break me quietly, but I had risen quietly too, and I had won. 2 weeks later, I rolled my suitcase into a sunny corner apartment at Willow Grove, an independent living community designed for active seniors. The walls were painted a soft cream, and the windows opened wide to a garden filled with lavender and wildflowers. There was no basement, no taped rules on the fridge, just fresh air, open light, and quiet freedom. The move was seamless. The nonprofit had taken ownership of the house as planned, and their transition team had already begun converting the bedrooms into warm, temporary homes for women who needed them. Women like me, who had been pushed to the margins by the very people they once nurtured. The last time I saw Daniel and Lena, they were packing boxes in the living room, subdued, distant. There were no screaming matches, no final speeches. We had said everything that needed saying in silence. They didn't ask where I was going. I didn't offer it. I didn't leave them in anger. I left them in truth. At Willow Grove, I found more than a roof. I found community. The people here weren't just passing time until their final days. They were painting, running book clubs, starting small businesses, volunteering. I met Judith, a retired accountant who taught line dancing. I met Bernice, who ran a podcast called Gray and Glorious. I met Evelyn, who fostered abandoned cats. And I met other women with stories like mine, quiet stories, often untold. One afternoon during a community potluck, I shared mine. It started as a simple anecdote, a mention of family tension and a basement room. But when I spoke, the room grew still. Heads nodded, eyes welled up. Judith said, "My son made me sign over power of attorney without explaining what it meant." Evelyn whispered, "My daughter told her friends I was just a live-in babysitter." The floodgates opened. I realized then that I wasn't alone. That night, I opened my laptop and typed the first line of a new document. We raised them, we fed them, we protected them, and when we became inconvenient, they told us to be quiet. We're not quiet anymore. It became the opening chapter of a book I decided to write, titled The Mothers Who Stopped Being Silent, part memoir, part guide, part rallying cry. Each week I wrote in the mornings with a cup of chamomile tea beside me. In the afternoons I taught a class in the community center called Money Matters, a crash course in financial literacy for older women. We covered wills, deeds, insurance, online banking, and how to spot financial manipulation. Women came with notebooks and questions. They left with confidence. One Thursday, a woman named Linda stayed behind after class. She looked about 65, with silver curls and worry lines deep around her eyes. "My daughter says I owe her for letting me live in her guest house," she said, voice shaking. "But I paid off her student loans. I just didn't keep the receipts." I put a hand on hers. "You don't need to prove your worth," I said. "You lived it. Now let's make sure no one ever forgets it again." We sat together and wrote a letter to her lawyer. It was the beginning of her reclaiming herself. That became my purpose. Not revenge, not bitterness, but rebuilding. Creating space for women who'd been silenced, reshaping the narrative we'd all been told. That we were burdens, extras, leftovers. We weren't. We were the foundation. And now, we were architects of something new. Some nights, I'd still think about Daniel, about the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap, his hair sticking to his forehead after soccer practice. I wondered if he remembered that woman, the one who stayed up with him during fevers, who taught him how to tie his shoes, who kept every report card in a drawer labeled proud. I missed that version of him, but I didn't miss the man he had become. Sometimes growth meant leaving people behind, even your own, especially your own, when they mistook your love for currency. At Willow Grove, no one called me Mom, but I felt more seen than I had in years. I was Margaret again, not resident, not room in the basement, just Margaret, and that was more than enough. The camera on my desk blinked red, recording. I sat facing it, hands folded in my lap, a soft gray cardigan over my shoulders. Behind me, the bookshelf was filled with family photos, books, and the first printed proof copy of The Mothers Who Stopped Being Silent. This wasn't a professional setup. I wasn't a YouTuber or a viral sensation, just a woman speaking into a lens, hoping her story would land in the hearts of those who needed it most. I took a breath and began. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 68 years old, and not too long ago I was made to feel like a guest in the home I paid for. The words felt lighter now, not because they hurt less, but because I had learned how to carry them. I moved in with my son and his wife after a fall. I thought I was being welcomed into a warm, loving home. Instead, I was handed a list of rules, silenced in the kitchen, and slowly erased from the center of the family I helped build. I paused, letting the silence fill the space. I thought I was helping them. In reality, I was financing a life that didn't include me. My voice didn't shake. I discovered that they had taken over my finances, redirected my insurance, and used my retirement savings as collateral without my knowledge. But the most painful part wasn't the money. It was realizing they didn't see me anymore. Not as a mother, not as a person. I looked into the lens, speaking now to the women I knew were watching from behind screens, in quiet bedrooms or on park benches with earbuds in. If you're watching this, and something inside you is whispering, "Me too," listen to it. You are not being difficult. You are not overreacting. You are not a burden. You are a woman who has given her whole life to others, and you deserve to be treated with dignity, not managed like a problem. I leaned forward slightly. You can love your family, deeply, fiercely, unconditionally, but don't let that love blind you to the truth. No one has the right to make you feel like a guest in the house that was built on your sacrifices. The words were sharp but honest. I had rewritten my story, not just on paper, but in action, and I wanted others to know they could do the same. Behind the camera, Judith gave me a thumbs up. I smiled gently. There is life after betrayal. There is joy after isolation. There is power in reclaiming what is yours, your voice, your space, your worth. I ended the recording the way I always did during my community talks. Stand tall, speak louder, and never apologize for taking up space. After I clicked stop, we uploaded the video to the group page for Women Rewriting Their Endings, a digital community we had launched just weeks before. Within an hour, the comments began to pour in. "Thank you for this. I thought I was alone. My daughter made me sign over my house. I'm going to a lawyer tomorrow. I needed this today. Thank you, Margaret." I sat back in my chair, letting their words wash over me. Somewhere out there, another woman was watching this video in silence, wiping away tears, realizing for the first time that she wasn't weak, just unseen, and that she didn't have to stay that way. Later that night, I took a walk through the garden paths at Willow Grove. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze, and a few porch lights glowed in the distance. I passed two women sitting on a bench, reading my book together, their heads nodding in rhythm. The sky was clear. My heart was too. I had once been a woman waiting at a dinner table with a cold pie and no candles. Now I was a woman whose words could light up a room, whose courage had cracked open a silent world. And that, I realized, was the legacy worth leaving. Not the house, not the money, but the reminder. We are not invisible. We were never meant to fade.